read a couple of words.
Hi, good morning, guys. Bonjour, good morning.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. I know it's been a hot minute. I know a lot of you have been leaving some comments and been saying, hey, where's it at? Keep at it. Hit us with some more content. I'm doing a lot of traveling, and I've just been enjoying that travel. You haven't seen a lot of posting of that. It's just me being where I'm at, taking in that moment for everything that it's worth. And I might put a couple shorts on out there. I mean, by shorts, I mean like the YouTube shorts, not necessarily the shorts that you wear. Okay, I know enough of the dad jokes and the dad puns, but we'll be getting back at it with some of the word and some great content when it comes to breaking down the scriptures. So we're still going to be staying within Acts. We had come from Acts 7 and into Acts 8. And I know before in the past we spent a lot of time breaking down a whole chapter, going verse by verse. Now, we're on Acts 8. There's a lot to really kind of digest here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time just taking chapter 8 and then going through all the verses and breaking it all down. There's a lot to digest here. And I feel like if we don't do it in segments and take it down in parts, there could be things that could be missed, could be very hard to follow. So hopefully you understand that. And then also you understand that stop, pause, like, subscribe, all that other weird stuff that people are telling you to do on YouTube these days. It's great. It's awesome. Cool. Thanks. All right. So Acts chapter 8. Saul was one of the witnesses and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. Now, stopping here in the moment on this, that word agreed within the Greek actually represents and stands for that he took pleasure in. He took personal interest in the persecution of Stephen. This was not a job assignment that he received and said, yeah, I just have to carry it out because this is something that's been placed on my shoulders and I have the mission to be able to do to make my master proud and make my chief leaders proud. No, this is a moment here that Saul took personal interest and enjoyed what he was seeing. So he gladly took the coats as a witness would do during these times to kind of establish within this moment from those that were persecuting Stephen. Continuing on, a great wave of persecution began that day, sweeping over the church in Jerusalem, and all the believers except the apostles were scattered through the regions of Judea and Samaria. Some devout men came and buried Stephen with great mourning. But Saul was going everywhere to destroy the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them in prison. Now, different contexts, different people that are kind of diving into the scripture and just within this section alone are talking about a lot of persecution. They're talking about the church and that the church should be growing. The church is an organism, if you will, so it is not a stagnant thing. It is pressing ahead. It is moving forward. It is reclaiming ground for the kingdom. It is doing things that is going to upset the enemy. It is doing things that are going to be able to cause strife, and it's going to be able to cause a ripple effect, whether it's in the community that it's in, by doing things and standing up and setting up a standard for the things that are right and proclaiming the gospel, proclaiming the name of Christ. So a church is not a stagnant thing. It is a thing that is moving forward. It is something that is growing. And if the church is not growing, if the church is not making disciples, it is not a church. It is only a church by name. If there is not growth, if there is not people multiplying themselves and creating themselves again and again and again, and as we would say, or as the scriptures would call, discipleship. On that same note, within that, I always like to use the framework to keep yourself within your spiritual or your Christian walk, to understand that you should be within one position on three sides. There should be somebody that you are discipling, and there should be somebody that's discipling you, that's holding you accountable to the word and to the scripture. So if the church is growing, the church is an organism, where you would find faiths that is working, where you find that the church is growing, there also you will find persecution. Where you find an effective gospel message, there you will also find persecution. These things are kind of going hand in hand, and you will see that throughout the scriptures here, especially in Acts, even before that, when Christ was walking with the disciples. So we know that with an effective gospel message, there is persecution. Continue on. So some devout men came and buried Stephen with great mourning. But Saul was going everywhere to destroy the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them in prison. But the believers who were scattered preached the good news about Jesus wherever they went. Philip, for example, went to the city of Samaria and told the people there about the Messiah. Crowds listened intently to Philip because they were eager to hear his message and see the miraculous signs he did. Many evil spirits were cast out, screaming as they left their victims, and many who had been paralyzed or lame were healed. So there was great joy in that city. We'll stop there. Those past couple little verses there are going to be kind of a teaser to what's to be able to come from the ministry that's happening and overflowing from this. So now you're also seeing something else that's happening here within this moment. Are you connecting those dots? Right? Connecting those dots. The fulfillment of the gospel is being made right here in this context, in the scripture, that Christ said what? That they would be doing what? That the good news would be scattered. That it would go to Samaria, it would go beyond Jerusalem, it would go to Judea, Samaria. So all of these different regions would be touched by the gospel. And so that's what I was saying, an effective gospel message is always going to be met with persecution, that the church is a growing, moving forward organism, because we heard Christ tell the disciples exactly what is happening here in this moment. That might not have thought have been tied to such great context of Christ being crucified and being risen again, or the fact that they would have to bring in a whole new disciple, Stephen, persecuted, for this to be able to come forward and come to fruition. But it is here. It is something that is happening. So there's already some things that we pointed out here in this text about the gospel, is that an effective gospel message is typically going to be able to met with persecution, that also that the church is an organism that is moving forward. It should be gaining ground for the kingdom. But there's three things in here that are really kind of tied to the context of what's kind of happening overall. If you kind of zoom out from the lens and just really look through Acts 1 through 4, and that is the response to persecution. That we see three responses to persecution happening in the scripture. All right, so there's three things that we need to be able to pay attention to here that are happening in the first 4 verses of the scripture here in chapter 8. You heard what I said. I said we're going to do it a little bit differently. I know that we always break it down. We only got 4 verses in before we really started diving in to understand the scriptures and understand what's happening within this context. But we should pay attention to 3 responses to persecution here. So that first one is honor and identify that the persecuted publicly. So honor and identify with the persecuted publicly. And then the second one is move on and spread the gospel. And the third one here is steadfast and continue to reach others where the persecution took place. Those are the 3 things that we are seeing happening here. Right, so that first thing of the 3, as far as, honoring and identifying with the person that's persecuted, we're going to be able to see that here, coming in at verse 2, some devout men came and buried Stephen with great mourning. So this section here was actually the people that had come were men that were respected within the community. This wasn't just like innocent passerbyers, like whomever. This would be somebody that would be fairly respected within the community, that would be carrying out this duty, that did carry out this duty. And so it also would probably be more people from Stephen's community as well, these astute, proud men that would have been recognized in their community. So instead of witnessing and seeing this moment and taking a step back and saying, whoa, we don't identify with what happened here, or we don't respect who this man is, or what the ministry and the work that he was doing for the community, they didn't just step back and say, whoa, we're out, this is pretty deep, there's persecution that's happening here. No, they stepped forward and they honored him by giving him a proper burial. So that very first one there that's happening in the scriptures is just stopping, identifying the persecuted, saying, yes, they were persecuted for the gospel. We recognize that, we acknowledge that, and then following up that with some honor, giving them honor where it is due after that persecution within that moment, showing them a sign of respect, giving them the respect that is due onto them. Burial maybe now might not necessarily be held as a high regard here in this day and age, or maybe in the Western eye, but depending on where you are logistically, and especially in this time and within the Middle East, burial is very significant in the matter of time of how quickly that you do it and in the response and how you do it there within. So it's key to see that, some devout men came, buried Stephen with great mourning. So they identified with the persecuted, they honored the persecuted and respected them and honored them within that moment. So that's that first one, right? And then we have here, but the believers who were scattered preached the good news about Jesus wherever they went. So that second one is moving forward, spreading the gospel. Using that as a spring point moment to be able to effectively spearhead and place the gospel in other places, in other regions, and in other ways. So the person, yes, they're persecuted within this public sphere, within this moment that you might be operating in right now. So let's say you're seeing that in the workplace, somebody is representing the gospel, or you're representing the gospel, you're persecuted, people are telling you to be quiet, things are becoming a little bit rougher, you're running that workplace. That's again probably one of these moments where you should probably shake the dust off your feet and move on and try to use your energy and your efforts somewhere else in your sphere of influence, in the way that your life is unfolding. Taking that moment of persecution, saying, okay, there's rejection that is happening here. This ground is hard. I have tried to spread the gospel. It has gotten me nowhere. I'm going to take my energy and my efforts, and now I'm going to place it somewhere else where the ground is good, where the gospel message will be received. Now, again, that's not me trying to say that you should turn maybe a blind eye or completely turn your back and continue to be able to live your faith out in front of them, but trying to press it upon them when something obviously came back harshly and strongly towards you in persecution. Maybe in those moments that you should be able to operate somewhere else, or if you were seeing a coworker or someone else in that area that you're spreading the gospel, being persecuted, continue to let them express their martyrdom there within that moment and move on and applying some effort somewhere else. Now, you might be thinking, well, Adam, that sounds like I'm just going to be throwing up my arms and I'm giving completely up. And that is not what I am saying here by any means, because you see that some people had remained behind. So, except the apostles were scattered. So what does that mean? Okay, so that means, all right, there was the persecution of people that honored, respected him in that moment, identified with it. There was those that had moved on and spread the gospel, and then there were those that had remained, that felt like it was their duty to stay where they were at and spread the gospel. So that is that third response that we're seeing to persecution. Honoring and respecting those that were persecuted, moving on to spread the gospel in other places, or just completely staying rooted and seeing it as your duty to remain at your post until the job is done. So that other point was not me trying to give you an exit by any means. Now, obviously you have to take that in time and prayer to figure out that was and connecting with it within that point. But there are going to be people that are going to be remaining behind and continuing to be able to try to get the gospel message within that area spread about. This is a lot of great stuff in Acts 8. And like I said, we just really went through the first 4 verses. I know I gave you a little bit of a teaser of the things that come, a lot of exciting things within that moment that gets me really excited. But that's what we have here today for you guys on the channel.